The Men of Liberty. Keely Lombardi, Junior Division, Historical Paper. When the Second Continental Congress is discussed in a history class, it is recognized as the group who started America. However, May 10, 1775, the Second Continental Congress was just a small meeting of men from the 13 colonies trying to keep their individual land in order. Today, the names of the men that comprise the Second Continental Congress are forever praised for their work in forming a foundation of a new nation. The delegates of the Second Continental Congress were patriots from their colonies, ones with dreams of new beginnings, bright futures, and the ideals of a new government. Those thoughts and ideas generated their actions, which they debated and utilized to make America the proud and free country that it is today. The results of the decisions made by the Second Continental Congress led to freedom from an unjust country. The 13 colonies became the United States of America because of the ideas put forth by the Second Continental Congress. This country could not be one nation under God without the men in the Second Continental Congress. The rights the delegates of the Second Continental Congress instituted into our legal system allowed the people of America to be free from unjust rule. The responsibilities the men in this group put forth on themselves led the citizens of America to live in the land of the free and home of the brave. The responsibilities the delegates of the Second Continental Congress held put the name United States next to America. The United States of America could not and would not be where it is today without the direct actions of the Second Continental Congress. We thank those delegates who were determined to define their rights for those who followed them so they could live free from British rule. The Second Continental Congress was a continuation of the First Continental Congress, which met briefly in Carpenter's Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. All 13 colonies except for Georgia sent delegates. The First Continental Congress was formed after many acts of unfair customs were placed upon the 13 colonies by the Parliament of Great Britain and King George III. These included the Sugar Act of 1764, Stamp Act of 1765, and the Quartering Act of 1765. The colonists united in calling these acts the Intolerable Acts. These acts were the main reason for the meeting of the First Continental Congress. After discussing the effects the Intolerable Acts had upon the colonies, the First Continental Congress agreed to let British Parliament govern the colonies as long as the Intolerable Acts were repealed. If King George III did not sustain their wishes, the colonies had a backup plan. They would form colonial militias and citizen armies. The First Continental Congress adjourned, but agreed to meet again in May of 1775 if King George III did not accept their proposal. The Second Continental Congress assembled on May 10, 1775, at Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia. All of the 13 colonies sent delegates to the Second Continental Congress. These men were selected by their colonial legislatures, by the people, or by the committees of correspondence of the respective colonies. In the Second Continental Congress, the delegates developed the idea of a Continental Army to protect the people of America, in which all of the separate colonial militias would be joined into one army. The idea of the Continental Army was decided upon by the delegates of the Second Continental Congress, and George Washington was unanimously made Commander-in-Chief of the recently established Continental Army. George Washington was aware of the struggle of the Continental Army and wrote, quote, "Not then organized as a nation, or known as a people upon the earth. We had no preparation. Money, the nerve of war, was wanting." End of quote. George Washington was in command of an army that would face the British military, the most powerful army on earth at the time. The Continental Army was a choice made because the delegates of the Second Continental Congress wanted a better organized militia. George Washington, a participant and patriot of the French and Indian Wars, was also a wealthy plantation owner and member of the Virginian legislature. He had the social stature of an effective commander-in-chief and also volunteered to work without pay. but the Army itself would need food and ammunition to work efficiently and effectively. The Second Continental Congress realized the men of the Continental Army lacked the funds necessary for a prolonged war. Congress, seeing this problem, issued Continental currency, but the Continentals depreciated greatly during the war because there were simply too many of them. The Second Continental Congress attempted to replace the old bills with new ones, but the attempt was unsuccessful. However, the Continental Army was fueled with the thoughts of revenge on Great Britain, and the Continental Army began to prosper in strength and the thought of not being under British control. Most colonists did not like the way Great Britain treated them and just wanted to be treated equally. The formation of the Continental Army was only one of the brilliant ideas the Second Continental Congress created for the 13 colonies. The Second Continental Congress did not originally start with the idea of independence from Great Britain, because most of the colonies still wanted to be united with Britain as one nation. The Second Continental Congress wrote the Olive Branch Petition to tell King George III that the colonies would only fight for their rights and not for freedom. The Olive Branch Petition did not please the king, so he hired German mercenaries in response. The delegates of the Second Continental Congress started to question whether or not freedom was the answer to all their problems. Many considered this idea and requested to move forward, but others wanted to stay connected with Great Britain as friendly acquaintances. In the next year, Richard Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, read a resolution before the Second Continental Congress, quote, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. End of quote. There had been defined disagreements between the colonies and Great Britain for decades, as far back as the French and Indian War. The resolution for independence was motioned and seconded, and therefore the Committee of Five was put into place to write the Declaration of Independence. The Committee of Five was made up of Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, John Adams of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and Robert R. Livingston of New York. These 5 men created a document that will forever mark the freedom of America on paper. Thomas Jefferson, at the age of 32 and a former lawyer, drafted the Declaration of Independence, while John Adams and Benjamin Franklin made changes to it. Using the 3 weeks of recess from the Congress to their advantage, the Committee of Five created a document that will forever live in American history. The Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, included the criminal doings of King George III. Jefferson wrote, quote, "He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people." End of quote. These few statements are the whole reason for writing the Declaration of Independence, because the Declaration was a document created by the Committee of Five to persuade all 56 delegates to vote for independence. The Second Continental Congress unanimously voted in favor of independence on July 2, 1776. The finalized Declaration of Independence was signed by most delegates on August 2, 1776. Other delegates signed the Declaration at a later date, and 2 others, John Dickinson and Robert R. Livingston, never signed the Declaration at all. The Declaration of Independence was signed and finalized 442 days after the first shot of the American Revolution, which started at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Even though the Declaration was finalized and signed, the Second Continental Congress job was not over. The delegates had to keep a country in order. The Second Continental Congress adopted the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, also known as the Articles of Confederation, on November 15, 1777. But it wasn't validated by all 13 states until March 1, 1781. The Articles of Confederation was an agreement among the 13 colonies that established the United States of America as a confederation of sovereign states. During this time, the Second Continental Congress changed its name to Congress of Confederation when the Articles of Confederation were ratified. The Articles of Confederation was a basic constitution, but leaving most of the power within the state governments. This became a problem and eventually led to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The Constitutional Convention was a meeting on May 25th to September 17th, 1787, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to discuss the problem of governing the United States of America. The purpose of the convention was to edit the Articles of Confederation, but instead led to the writing of the United States Constitution. Men of the Second Continental Congress affected the world we live in today in many ways. They created a modern society in the United States of America that is able to live with the freedom to express themselves, to bear arms, to deny shelter of a soldier, to a fair jury, and so many more, because they instituted specific human rights into our law system. The Second Continental Congress development of the Continental Army allowed the citizens of the 13 colonies to be protected and able to fight back against Britain. This was a contribution to the product of independence from Great Britain. All of the documents the Second Continental Congress created, produced, and contributed to independence from Great Britain. These items were highlighted by the proposal by Richard Henry Lee for independence, the Declaration of Independence, the Olive Branch Petition, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution of the United States of America. The Second Continental Congress was a group of patriotic men who proudly sacrificed their lives for their colonies and later their country. The Second Continental Congress wasn't just a meeting of men. It's a story of men. A story of the finding of wisdom and courage to produce success when all hope was lost. The rights the delegates of the Second Continental Congress instituted into our legal system allows the people of America to be able to live free from British rule. The citizens of a modern American society are able to speak their mind and express themselves in any way. The modern American has the right to protect themselves with a weapon. The modern American can live with many freedoms because the men of the Second Continental Congress developed a government of the people and for the people. The insight and perseverance of the delegates of the Second Continental Congress created the foundation for the 13 colonies to become the United States of America. The Second Continental Congress built the framework of the United States of America. These acts of these courageous men left historical marks behind them. Without the actions of the men who comprised the Second Continental Congress, the United States would not be where it is today, a self-governing country, a free country. The names of the men who sat in the State House of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, will forever be the names of freedom, the names of men who started a country. To believe in American spirit, a person must believe in the American story. The story of the Second Continental Congress.